Good day, everyone. So we are now going to discuss the overall structure, a simplified structure of the travel industry, also known as the transportation industry. Now, before to proceed with this video, the student should be able to watch first the current trends and the impact and contribution of the International Air Transportation Association. So as you can have a better appreciation of this video. Now to proceed, I'm going to discuss the scope and the limits of the travel industry, also known as the transportation industry. So the travel industry's primary purpose is to transport either cargo or passenger. Since our subject is travel and tour management, so our main goal would be focusing more about the passenger. So, of course, many businesses involving aviation industry, maritime industry, rail industry also caters not only for the passenger segment but also for the cargo segment. Of course, during the pandemic, they are much more reliant on the cargo business since cargo there's no restriction, there's no travel restriction because the cargo does not um, has a limited possibility of carrying diseases, unlike passenger, of course. After all, one of the major triggers why the pandemic happens is because of the growth of the travel industry, particularly the aviation industry or the airline industry. And as we are more connected globally, diseases and, of course, other negative or negative impacts of travel and tourism are much more magnified and highlighted. And one of that is the pandemic that happens to all of us. So it started in Wuhan, China, and of course it's eventually spread out throughout the globe because of the interconnectivity and social mobility, which is fostered by the aviation or the airline industry. Now, of course, since we are going to concern so much about the passenger cargo is that is a separate topic that we're not going to discuss or cover in my subject. So our subject will be mostly focusing on the business about the passenger segment. Now, the passenger segment, particularly the aviation industry, which of course Philippine Airlines is an airlines because it caters mostly with the passenger. So in that sense, they are an airline. But of course, Philippine Airlines together with Cebu Pacific has the cargo business. But yun nga, as I did mention to you, the cargo is now their main focus because it brings more money to them rather than the passenger segment. But of course, if things to return back to a some sort of resemblance of normalcy, or eventually it will return back to a certain degree of being normal, the passenger segment would now could supplement the earning and profitability potential of these airlines. In this regard, maritime industry, of course, they do have the cargo segment and the passenger segment, which normally caters for cruise liners. These are cruise ships, right? For example, Royal Caribbean, Norwegian Cruise Lines, Princess Cruises. These are luxury ships that caters to globe-trotting passengers. And of course, we have the local ships that serves as the inter-island or within the confinements of the in inland bodies of the inland bodies of water within the confine of a national territory. So in the Philippines, we have Super Ferry as our major ferry provider. We have To Go. So these are some of the examples that are used by our local passengers to go to their provinces. Okay, so it's still a major source of or a major means of transportation, particularly for those low-income families. Now, unlike in other places, in the Philippine setup, we have a limited use of the rail. So, unlike in Japan, they have a very extensive rail network. So, actually, they have different companies that provide services for this rail. So, it's a very big business abroad, but in the Philippines, it's quite confined with the Philippine National Railways (PNR) with the MRT LRT system. So in other places it's quite vast. They have the in Japan they have the Shinkansen, that's a bullet train. In China they have the magnetic levitated train, so maglev train. They have different types of train systems for different use. For example, they have the interregional train system, which, for example, a point of illustration would be you can travel Manila to Subic using this train. So you can ride to a greater terminal, let's say Manila terminal, and then you just have to drop off at the Subic train station. So that's how convenient it could be if all of the major cities in the Philippines are going to be connected by rail, just like in Japan or in Korea or in China. So they have this very extensive rail network, which are, of course, some sort. It serves as an alternative for air transportation because rail industry is much more cheaper because you can load more people in rail rather than plane. Of course, it also serves time because you don't need to wait for your flight, arrive earlier in the airport. So, in that sense, rails industry is quite a promising industry if we could develop that in the Philippines. Now, for our subject, we concern about rail industry because uh, since it's commonly used abroad. So, as a future travel professional, particularly working with travel agency and tour operation, we're going to involve ourselves in dealing with rail pass, with your rail, so in different rail system or different tickets for trains. So, of course, familiarity with this will help you go a long way in working with the industry. Now, of course, we have discussed the maritime industry. Our main focus, our main product of concern is cruise line, ferry to go. And for our example here is Royal Caribbean Cruise Line and the Star Cruise. Okay. For rail industry, we sell JR Pass, Korail in Korea. In China, we do include some train services. In America, we have Amtrak, and some sort of in Europe they have the most extensive, and they have the Eurail Pass. Okay, so very extensive product to be discussed. Now, since 80% of the business in a travel agency concerns about aviation, particularly aviation is also called as the airline industry. So without nuisance to that, we have to discuss the airline industry. So the further airline industry, for clarification and of course for simplification purposes, its main operations are divided into international flights and domestic flights. So when say international flight, you are crossing between two international states or international boundaries or territories. Domestic, your flight emanates and ends to the confine of a national territory, which the airlines of the flag of course each airline has its nationalities, no, or nationality. So when your airline is a Philippine airline flying within the Philippine territory, so it's considered as a domestic flight. Where if your airline is a, let's say for example, Cebu Pacific, a Filipino airline flying to Hong Kong airspace, that is an international flight. So technically in that sense. Now, when you say international flight, the laws, the govern the conduct of the flight, of course, involves two party. So a party, the city of origin, which happens to be the flag of or the nationality of the airship. Okay, so for our example a while ago, that would be Philippine because you are flying Philippine Airlines. Now, the next would be the concerned country of destination. In my prior example, that's Hong Kong. So that is they do have their own policies on the use of the airspace. So now, in order to further harmonize and regulate all the requirement for air travel, Of course, it has led these member states of United Nations to form a interorganizational or international agency that will discuss and harmonize the rules governing the civil aviation. Particularly, it is embodied with the International Civil Aviation Organization. Okay, so ICAO. So ICAO represents this regulatory bodies in the Philippines and Hong Kong, in which governs these relationships. Now, to represent the interests of the airlines, and of course, um, closely working with ICAO, we have IATA. So IATA is primarily concerned about the international flight. IATA does not involve itself with the domestic flight because domestic flights are solely governed by the Philippine authorities or the national authority which covers the domestic flight. Okay, in our case, that's the CAAP, okay, Civil Aviation Authority of the Philippines. In the case of United States of America, that's the Federal Aviation Authority, and of course, other concerning agencies. Now, at the bottom of this structure, you will see on your yellow box is the travel intermediaries. The travel intermediaries are the bottom feeder of this structure. Why? Because it does not create product on its own. It's reliant on the product produced by the airlines. Of course, that's the air seat, air transportation. Cruise line, that's the experience, the cruise holiday. Ferry, the ferry ticket or the transportation. The travel agents are they are on bottom because they are there to serve a purpose of connecting passenger to their desired travel products. Now, of course, technology changes, and we can see that the passenger could directly book with airline to do their business. So, of course, these are some of the challenges that are now being faced by travel intermediaries. And by the way, travel intermediaries in our context refers to two organization. First is the travel agency, and the second is the tour operator. The difference of the two is, of course, the travel agency is more simpler in structure because they are just basically the intermediaries. They're representing the passenger and also representing the airline. So basically, they are the go between or the middleman of the chain. Now, tour operator is a little bit more complicated because although they don't produce their own product and services, but they do enhance. They do the assembling part because they combine the different products of the airlines together with the hotel, with the cruise line to create tour packages that they're going to sell for the market. So that is a different story, a different angle, but they're both travel intermediary. One is much more simple and the other one is complicated or complex, or their operation is much more um, value adding compared with the travel agency, which concerns about more of the retail. Now, I didn't mention the automobile industry because the automobile industry is basically refers to, in our context in travel and tour, refers to the rent a car business. So right now, rent a car business such as Hertz and other car company is quite of a loss because of the technological obsolescence, or the technology already capture, or they are no longer needed by the market because we have Grab and Uber which of course replace their traditional market niche. Though we do have this little portion of tourists that would want to rent their own car when they travel. So that's part of the enhancement of the experience. But of course, um, knowing the technological development right now, urban cities are more equipped with more convenient and reliant mass transportation system. So the need for driving your own car goes down. And further, convenience of renting vehicle through the use of apps like Grab and Uber have already um, what do you call this highlighted, or they have already capped the the growth of this industry. So the automobile industry in our context could not be really that profitable if we're going to sell them or we're going to engage business with them. Okay. So that's it. So that's the structure of the industry on the perspective of a travel agent. So we are concerned mostly of the aviation business. So that's 80%. 80% of what we do in a travel agency is centers around the airlines, and it's up to your company if it's a mostly domestic tour operation or domestic travel agency. Of course, it's mostly domestic flight. If it's more of the outbound or international, so it's more of the international. Of course, we do have little business with cruise line, and of course rail company and ferry. But if your agency is mostly focusing with cruise passenger, that will be amounting for substantial the number of clientele. No, of course you have this kind of special niche for that. But anyway, we're going to discuss this niche of travel agency in our separate video, and for that, thank you very much for listening. So stay safe, everyone.